the electric blanket off. It is nice. It feels like summer's coming at last. It feels like a very long winter.
Sure, I think it might be the people on. We had it in our speaker notes that if you're when you're speaking, you have your screen on.
Kia ora koutou. Members, if you'd just like to take your seat, I'll call this meeting to order. A few housekeeping points I'd just like to cover, just explaining that this meeting has been recorded and been live streamed on Council's YouTube channel. That we have level 2 restrictions, which requires everyone to scan in and to social distance in the chamber, but masks can be taken off at the table as public have been asked to observe this meeting online. For that reason, that everyone here is associated with Council, that I won't cover the health and safety procedures that we're all familiar with, that are on the screen. You can read to familiarise yourself. Councillors in person to select the option in the voting devices, but councillors on the Teams app that are electronically attending this meeting, if you can vote and request to speak through the chat box on the Teams app. And if I can ask councillors and presenters to give their name before speaking and use the microphone. Can I also note that Councillor Bowen and Councillor Orfi Malakard are attending electronically, and it's great to be able to have them participate and be engaged for this meeting. And apologies I have for Councillor Dingwall and Councillor Finlay. Are there any others? Councillor Rutherford, our Deputy Mayor for lateness. Mr. Mayor.
I may have to pop out, just a call with Three Waters, so on council business, possibly early departure.
Okay, we'll also note that. I'll move them, seconded by Councillor Beattie, and ask for a vote. I called Councillor Beattie as the seconder just for formality. But that is passed, 13 votes for, none against. There's no notice of additional items. Moves us to item 3, declarations of interest. There being none, there is no public comment, which moves us to item 5, and I'm thrilled to be able to invite guests online from the New Zealand Defence Force, Major Andy Olivier, Mr Hayden Prosser, who is the CLP Infrastructure Lead, and Chrissy Taylor, who is the CLP Change and Comms Manager. They also will be speaking to a PowerPoint presentation which has been circulated prior, so if you can follow that along in your own means. And now I'd like to welcome you to present. So thank you for attending today.
Thanks for having us. It's a pleasure to come and talk to you about our project today. So as you said in the introduction, I'm Hayden Prosser. I'm the CLP Infrastructure Lead. Just as a bit of context, the Consolidated Logistics Project is broader than just the infrastructure. So we are delivering ICT upgrades, organisational redesign and enhancing processes and policies around equipment management and safety. But certainly infrastructure is a big part of our project. I'm not sure how much you know about defence logistics, but it's essentially all the background work that goes on to ensure that equipment gets to where it needs to and is safe to operate in support of New Zealand Defence Force meeting its outcomes or outputs that it has agreed to deliver to government. So defence logistics, it is changing. The equipment we're getting is a lot broader and a bigger array of equipment, and it's a lot more technologically advanced and has higher security requirements than equipment of the past. And so to support that, we are delivering these buildings that allow us to better maintain, supply and store the equipment. So key here is our project's delivering 5 buildings, 3 of which will be at the Linton military camp and 2 down in Burnham. So I'll be talking to the maintenance support facility, which is a workshop that's currently under construction here, as well as touching on the other builds that we'll be delivering at Linton camp. So I take it as the slides are read, so you've had a chance to see them. But the Linton, I'll just touch on a few key points, and then obviously there'll be some questions if you want to ask. So the maintenance support facility, it basically consolidates all the military trades into one workshop location, and that includes things like motor transport or motor vehicle repair, weapons repair, general engineering, and what they call 230 volt, but electrical repair as well as some repair of really high-tech kit and secure radios. Now, all these different trades require different environments in which to undertake the repair, so it's all captured within one facility. And I'll get into a bit more detail on each build shortly, but the supply facility similarly consolidates all the main supply functions in the camp. That is not due for delivery for a few more years, but the intent is that the building will be on the camp wire to essentially stop the larger B-train and larger vehicles from entering the camp. It'll also house both the military unit and civilian workforces. So the New Zealand Defence Force works quite closely with its strategic partners, and they have logistic workforces that support the way that NZDF operates. And the last building here at Linton will be vehicle storage. So about 10 years ago, NZDF purchased a number of very large vehicles which have been waiting for their storage, and we're going to consolidate that into one location in the camp. So for the maintenance workshop facility, the building that's currently under construction here, it replaces buildings that have been around since about the 1960s to be more purpose-built and fit for purpose for New Zealand Defence Force today and for about 60 years into the future. It's a large building, so about 8,500 square metres, and where possible we've made it expandable and modular so that if NZDF equipment grows in the future in terms of volume, then so too can the workshop. It can house about 180 to 200 people, and that's again military and contractors. And then some of the more interesting aspects of it, it's got a 25-metre test fire tunnel. It's got a large commercial style motor transport area for with the drive-through lanes with 8 large lanes with heavy lift capability. So we're planning for the next generation of vehicles which we know are coming, and they are generally heavier and large vehicles, so we have lift capability for those. Within the environment, we're catering for equipment like lasers, night vision goggles, some fairly high-tech equipment, so we need laboratory-level clean rooms for maintaining some of that kit. And with that comes testing ability like dark rooms and the like. So it's some pretty exciting stuff to be delivering, and somewhat different from what you might see at a regular workshop. Throughout design and definitely during construction, the focus has been on health and safety and well-being as well. With making sure this is a comfortable place for people to work. I know in the past it hasn't been quite that way, hasn't been so comfortable, and that does impact on things like attrition for keeping soldiers within the Defence Force. So this is really an investment in the well-being of New Zealand Defence Force Army. So in terms of I'll just touch quickly on the supply facility and the regional vehicle storage. So again, this is to be delivered in a few years' time. The supply facility here is about 10,000 square metres, so larger than the NSF, the workshop, and it will have specialised environmental storage and racking and the like. And it will just provide a really modern storage facility. And one of the key aspects in there, it does have an MPI certified bond store as well. That's for coming in from overseas, and that customs can then come in and check, so it meets all those regulations. And then, again, with that regional vehicle storage, it's a different way of operating for the users here in the camp, where typically they hold the equipment within their own what they call unit lines. Now it's all going to be pulled together in a consolidated parking area. So, one other thing I forgot to mention, sorry about the supply facility. There is that goods distribution on the camp wire, as I mentioned, but there's also something that is essentially a hire pool. It's called a regional equipment pool, and it's to enable NZDF to work in a different way where they're going to be sharing equipment in the future. So it sort of enables a new strategy for NZDF. So just touching on, let me know if I'm going too fast or you have any questions as we go, but just touching on some of the key regional benefits for the workshop facility build that we're delivering at the moment. So we've gone with a local contractor and using local suppliers. So we're going with Macmillan and Lockwood, who have been in the region for about 60 years. At its peak, we're going to have about 120 workers on site, and that's over a two-year build period. But if you take into account the broader supply chain, which the local supply chain is about 360 people on the build. So it's obviously really positive from a local development and growth perspective. There's about 85% on the build are local. Additionally, we are supporting trade training for young apprentices as well, with both a mix of military and non-military that we're working through, and that could be up to 50 to 60 potentially on the site. And in terms of the cost, so of the $41 million contracted for the build, we're at about 90% of it has been spent on local or semi-local supply chains. Part of that, and that contributes to the sustainability factor as well, not transporting things in from a really long way away. And then about $2 million in total is going overseas, and that's where we've got specialised kit that needs to be brought in. A few of the key features from sustainability and well-being perspective. So again, because we're building for 60 years, a lot of these materials are far more durable than you might see on other builds. We've tried to build it in a energy and water efficient with considerations in mind. So we've got rainwater harvesting, LED lighting that's low energy use but long lasting, and energy efficient heat pumps and the like. And we do have an electrical board that can be upgraded to allow for the solar and wind capability in the future. Additional, in terms of well-being, we do have a lot of acoustic controls and then thermal insulation and the like. In terms of placement, we've situated the building so it doesn't maximise that solar gain as well. So that's probably the key aspects of the workshop facility. I'll pass over to Andy. I'm assuming there's going to be questions quickly on that, just to talk about some of the other work that's on at the New Zealand Defence Force at the moment here at Linton Camp.
Take it, no questions.
What we'll do, just to help explain, we'll take questions at the end of your complete presentation.
Sure, not a problem. As mentioned before, Major Andy Livy here, I represent Defence Estate and Infrastructure, which seems odd, but Hayden is one of the leaders of one of the largest programs in CAMP, so my remit is managing the estate from a holistic point of view, and I interface with certain projects. So there's a lot actually going on in Linton, at least currently, with the CLP and also in the future. Some of you councillors may be aware that we've done a Linton Watercourse project and upgraded the stormwater network. We're also, as with all the new environmental standards, expecting higher rainfall, so that's quite key to us to have a sustainable estate that's actually responsible. We do take that land management and land ownership that's quite important to my team here. We're also looking at upgrading the potable water reticulation within CAMP. That's both internally, but also looking to PNCC to supply some water, and some of you councillors may be aware of that. I know there's some discussions with Defence at high levels with an MOU coming through, and it obviously has something to do with the Three Waters legislation that's being pushed through Parliament. We've also upgraded our high voltage network within CAMP, and that's currently about 80% complete, and we're just looking at a ring main. The idea is, as we need more power, we'll then expand the high voltage network to the rest of CAMP, so that we are future-proofing CAMP, both adding resilience but also adding capacity, and we're working with our power suppliers for that. And then part of it is also, as the Army is looking to expand, and with these new facilities, we're going to need more car parking. It's just a fact of modern life, so we're looking at how we can locate car parks to minimise soldiers choosing to drive their vehicles across camp, but actually park them and be convenient. And currently, we're looking at putting, at this stage, we've got funding from ECAP for 5 EV charging stations within camp. One of them will be a DC fast charger, and the 4 of them will be just what we call level 2 chargers, so that when we start converting our commercial fleet, what we call our white fleet, for residential type vehicles, and talking about Toyota Corollas and the like, not military vehicles, we'll have capacity to charge that in camp. It is a very brief rundown of a very busy estate, so I appreciate I've had a sort of race through that, but if there are any specific questions, I'm happy to answer them, or at least if we don't have time in the session, put something in writing and send it back to the council.
Thank you. So you open to questions now. We do have several already indicating. Councillor Johnson, followed by the Mayor.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks for your presentation. I've just got some questions about the type and number of the heavy vehicles that might be being stored in the new regional vehicle storage. My understanding from your presentation is that there would be an increase in the size and the number of those vehicles. Is that correct?
Apologies. The regional vehicle storage is for vehicles that are already in the fleet. There's 138 vehicles of this type in the camp at the moment, and so we'll be providing storage for those. But the way in which we've designed the workshop is for any future fleets of vehicles that are coming to replace because we have a number of fleets. Some of them are older, so the future fleets that are coming to replace the older ones, we've designed it just to be a little bit larger, be able to take a little bit heavier weight.
Okay, so there's no plans at the moment to increase the number of vehicles that are stored at Linton from what's there already?
It's probably outside the scope of my project, but that's my understanding is there isn't necessarily need to increase the number of vehicles.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. The Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Hayden and Major Andy. That's a good update. Look, on 2 questions. What's the total spend, including, you've outlined around the new builds, or is that classified information you can't tell us, in terms of the whole infrastructure, everything that you're doing there on camp?
I need to work it out for those 3 builds, and we are managing the funding across the program, so we have a priority order of infrastructure. So the latter builds could be downsized depending on the cost increases we experience in the market. So to be honest, there's not a set budget per se for the builds at Linton Camp here. So we do estimate that currently the Linton MSF, which is a $41 million contract, we do have contingency on top of that as well. But certainly the other builds would be estimated in the same sort of region.
Okay, and second question, timing. You've got some times there in your papers or slides. That's obviously around the build, but the infrastructure around Three Waters and power sounds like it's concurrently happening as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, I can talk to more the infrastructure specific supporting projects. So our ring main at the moment is about 80% complete. It was delayed twice for lockdown. We were waiting for equipment to arrive from overseas, and then it got caught in Auckland, so it's currently being commissioned. So yes, it is a concurrent activity. And our potable network upgrade, we're in the planning stages of that at the moment, and we're just waiting for a water model to be completed. And that's also, with that information, we can engage with PNCC more formally, in terms of the MOU. So that's kind of where we're at. So there is a lot of concurrent activity, both in terms of the design phase, but also the delivery phase, that my team are responsible for to ensure that the CLP project is well supported during the different phases of construction as those buildings start to be tendered and built.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks Hayden and thanks Andy for the presentation. Just a couple things that caught my ears there. Hayden, I think I heard you say that you're hoping to get more of the sort of heavy vehicles and B trains sort of out of camp or to the periphery of camp. Can you just help us understand the rationale there?
Yeah, sure. It's basically enabling a future security requirement as well. So if there's a large event and the security of the whole camp is to be elevated, it prevents in future more vehicles coming into the camp. But at the moment, it's still, the intention is that we do get larger vehicles coming to drop off goods and supply and materials, whether it be a courier or freight, and they come into the camp. And the camp it does get congested. There's a lot of users in the camp. And it's both the safety and security that it would cater for those vehicles to provide the drop-off of freight, but outside the camp boundary or on the camp boundary.
Great, thank you. That's helpful to understand that. I was just interested too, I think one of the building specs that you're running through, you're talking about sort of long-term building materials, LED lights, those sort of things, and you said you'd gone with a sort of solar-enabled approach, but hadn't actually gone with the solar included. And then a bit further on, there's sort of conversation around energy resilience type stuff. I just sort of wondered sort of what the decision-making context was around when you would push ahead with solar, and how much of that might be around environmental, how much of it might be around resilience, cost, etc.
Yeah. That's a complicated answer to what might seem a simple question. So Defence Estate Infrastructure and NZDF is committed to sustainability. However, what that means on a construction site is complicated when you're faced with legacy buildings and what you need to do to try and make them efficient. It becomes a bit simpler when you're looking at new buildings, but then you have to look at what the priority of the building is. And essentially, we want to achieve operational effectiveness, and then it comes down to the question, what technology are we going to invest in, what is the return on investment, and does it sacrifice any of the operational requirements of the building? And so that discussion was had for every new project, so new capital spend, and those decisions are made well above mine or Hayden's sort of pay grade. But there is that conversation, and there is a framework for the Defence to use, at least Defence Estate Infrastructure, to make those decisions. The approach currently with the CLP is that once it is built and we have a better understanding of its power usage, we have a better idea, this is where my team comes involved, a better idea of how we can retrofit solar panels and, if required, batteries to lower the overall cost and impact on the grid. But at the moment, there are quite a few unknowns with a building like this, so we can't just go put solar in because it might not be the right sized solution for the building. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you, Andy. And you're right, sometimes simple questions have complex answers. Finally, if I might, Mr. Chair, just I suppose it's something that we're wrestling with in the city here, and we spent a bit of time on it this morning in committee. Sort of the challenging times that we're in terms of really delivering infrastructure. and sort of be interested to know what the Defence Force sort of approach is there. Is it the only words I can think of is soldier on, but I'm not sure that's the right analogy. But is it sort of that sort of thing that no matter how tight the labor market gets, no matter how disrupted the supply chain gets, et cetera, we're just going to deliver this infrastructure? Or do you look at sort of the timing of that delivery vis-a-vis the market realities that we're up against?
Yeah, so we certainly staging has been a consideration. It's both reflecting the Army priority, but also looking at the cost pressures on New Zealand Defence Force, not just from our project perspective, but much broader across the Defence Capital Plan. Now, I can't talk into too much detail of that because I'm just the lead for this infrastructure. But yes, it's something, we've been seeing escalating prices in terms of materials. We know that the labour shortage and the squeeze that's on there. So it does affect our delivery planning and our timeline. But yeah, that's probably all I can say at this point, unless you had anything to add, Andy.
Yeah, it comes down to us in terms of what we choose to soldier on with. So the bottom line is we have to support operations in camp, and then there's a welfare aspect for how we support soldiers and their families within camp. And then you balance that over what your likely cost projections are going to be for the work ahead. As you can imagine, a camp this size, we have a large maintenance bill, and it's something that my team and I struggle with probably on a daily basis about making trade-offs about what we are going to do and what we're going to defer. It's not an easy position to be in, but then again, it's the job I have. I wish there was a simpler answer, but there's the economics of construction at the moment.
Thank you both, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. 3 final questions. If I can limit 1 question per member, just respectful of their time. Councillor Hancock, Councillor Beattie and Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the presentation. I just want to try and perhaps understand some of the workforce implications there. In one of the slides, you've got 100 to 120 workers on site at peak construction, and in the next bullet point, you're talking about 300 to 360 people, primarily being sourced from local companies, including supply chain and manufacture. Are they 2 separate groups of people, or the same?
Yeah, good point. So my understanding is the 360 includes the 120. So if you consider the people that are working on the work site, as well as in addition, those that are in the local supply chain, so they're producing the materials, they're transporting them, and the like, that will total around 360 at its peak. Those numbers were provided to us by Macmillan and Lockwood, who had done that analysis.
Yeah, great, thank you. And so if I just may, so in terms, one part of it, you talk about 15 to 20% from outside the region. Are there any accommodation considerations that have had to be dealt with by the military?
Not by military, sorry if I'm stepping on your toes. My understanding is there are some temporary housing arrangements outside of the military, whether it be local motels or the like, or local accommodation to support some people who have had to move into the region for this development, but that is managed by the sub-trades or the contractor.
Great, thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Beattie.
My question was around the accommodation. So thank you for your presentation. So there's no additional housing or being considered for on-site of the campus?
Are you offering, Councillor?
No, I was hoping you guys would be offering us a partnership.
I wish that would be the case. This is me personally, but no, it's sort of outside the remit of this particular project, and there's a larger social issue with housing, both in the community, but also how it impacts soldiers. And I just have to leave it to our generals to make decisions with finite resources.
Okay, thank you. Another conversation, I think.
Great. Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, for your presentation. My question is about, I understand that 90% of those $40 million will be spent through using the local supply chain. I just want to clarify what is local. It is local Manawatu versus New Zealand, or New Zealand versus international?
Yeah, I probably need to come back to you on this exact split. But again, the information is provided by Macmillan, but I do know our main, our main supplies that we are requiring, whether it be steel or ply and the like, is from Stevenson's, which is very close here in the Manawatu, providing the steel, and then Crichton's, I believe, providing the ply and ceiling tiles and some of the others. So a large part of it is certainly here in the Manawatu, but I could drill down and provide back to you on that if you need.
Mr. Chair. Thank you to you all for presenting today. You're more than welcome to stay online and listen to any comments that may exist as a follow through on this item. But I would have loved to have been able to meet in person. We all would have, and appreciate at least going through electronic. And we've got your presentation. It does outline the significant infrastructure that's lined up for Linton, in fact for the Defence Force, which is huge. And we would all look forward to the opportunity when it's completed to see the state-of-the-art sustainability that's been designed into the maintenance workshop, and just to appreciate the full scale of what you've constructing out there. And to acknowledge the Defence Force has been a real significant partner for us in the city, and many of the soldiers out there and personnel are valuable members of our city. So while your project for many of us is out of sight, it's kind of out of mind, this has brought it back to the forefront and just to fully appreciate what you do and what your plans are and what's being developed out there. So thank you. I'm going to move the recommendations before we open up to any comments. That the Infrastructure Committee receives the presentation for information and look for a seconder, Councillor Hancock, and open it up if there's any comments that members may wish to make. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, look, I just concur with your comments. Because of our current state as a nation, with in and out of COVID and Delta levels, and our Defence Force, especially our Army, being MIQ, in charge of the MIQ facilities, we don't somewhat see our colleagues and friends at Linton as much as we would normally do. But just want to acknowledge not only the infrastructure investment they're making on base out there, but the contribution to the city. 7,000, I think the latest sector profile was 7,000 servicemen and women, along with civilians and families that are involved in the New Zealand Defence Force. And that's quite a big chunk for our economic, but also the cultural and social impacts they have on our city positively. So thanks to Hayden and Major Andy for their presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and again, as Chair, I look forward to meeting in person down the track, and again, thank you on behalf of the committee for your time to present today. Councillors, I'd now like to call a vote. That has passed 13 votes for and none against. That leads us on to our next item, item 6, which is confirmation of the minutes of the 24th of March. I'm prepared to move them as seconder, Councillor Hancock, and open it up for any comment. There being none, I'll like to call for a vote. That has passed 11 votes for, none against, and 2 abstentions. Item 7 is the Papaarea Place redevelopment 6-month update, and I'd like to welcome to present Bryce Hoskins, who's the manager of property. Welcome, Bryce, and we do acknowledge that this report time has lagged from it being presented, but maybe you would like to comment on that as well. Thank you, Bryce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, this was originally intended to be presented in June, so it's a wee way out of date, using information from April, if I recall. So a bit of an update on things. Stage 2 is now complete, so as of the 20th of October, we've had that handed back, and we have got a Code of Compliance certificate, so they're ready to be occupied. There's a blessing this Friday at 10 o'clock, of which you're all invited. Straight after the Bunnythorpe Community Centre one, essentially. And then basically we'll be taking through potential tenants next week and looking for them to be moving in this side of Christmas, which is a fantastic outcome. I guess just in terms of, in light of the conversations this morning and in terms of stage 3, there'll be a paper coming to council in December looking to award the contract for stage 3. Unlike stage 2 and stage 1 that were sort of tied together through one contract, stage 3 essentially will have to be a completely separate contract. So that'll be coming to you in December, but we have confirmed the contractor and all of their subbies availability, and they'll be looking to start on site, all going well, January, February next year. Outside of that, probably the only other thing I would say is there's actually the next 6-monthly update report being presented in November next month. So you'll hear from me 2 times in a row. Thank you.
We'd look forward to that. We've got questions. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Bryce. So just a question on that next report that's coming to us, because obviously a lot of the information, this one's quite old. Will there be financials included in that?
No. Being the infrastructure committee, that typically wouldn't be discussed. It just talks at a high level.
Okay, so I'm not sure if you or the GM would be the right person to answer this question, but these reports were requested through the Finance and Audit Committee, originally quarterly, and then became 6-monthly, and then got transferred to this committee. I don't really mind what committee they come to, but the fact that the financial information has dropped off, is that because it's coming to this committee, or what's the reason for the financials dropping off the reporting?
Correct. So when it was coming to the Finance and Performance Committee, when the Infrastructure Committee was established, Council made the decision to move this report to the Infrastructure Committee, and the report was, I guess, amended accordingly on how we were reporting it. One thing I can say is I can give you assurance that stage 2, like stage 1, was delivered within budget.
So thanks for that. So in terms of, it's good to hear that it's been delivered within budget. In terms of looking at our financial report this morning, the only information on this program was a $100,000 deficit, obviously for this financial year's part of that program, and I'd have to go back to an old report. So is there a way that we can holistically look at the summary of a program like this, if, in the absence of having that financial information with this report, what would be the best way for us to find that out?
And is that also just the shape of the terms of reference for this committee? Has that been a limitation, or is that not part of the reason? Can I, maybe, who would like to cover this? Our Assistant Chief Executive, Cheryl Bryant.
Can we come back to you on this, if we can just have a look at it and then come back to you? Would be helpful. Thank you.
And just quickly, the 2.5 on page 14 talks about a monthly meeting on the last Thursday of each month with a summary report, and the information in this paper has been provided as a result of the April meeting. Obviously there's been 5 months since then. Has there been meetings in the last 5 or 6 months? And if so, I'm just trying to understand why the information in this report is so old, I guess.
So there has continued to be monthly meetings.
Yep.
So basically, because of the lead-in time to be able to present a report, we're sort of always using, depending on the timing of the report, we're always using a month or in some cases, unfortunately, 2 prior to the report being able to be presented. So the one from April, as I said, this was meant to be presented in June. But you are correct. Since then, there's been a number of more meetings, and the one in November that I'm presenting next month will summarise October's monthly meeting report.
Okay, lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Bryce. I guess somewhat in the same vein, but sort of thinking about it from a slightly different perspective in terms of sort of seeing a report that's been substantially delayed and then having one pop up a month later. I guess from your perspective, would it be more helpful for us to be staying on sort of a time lens of it every number of months, or would there be a rationale perhaps around thinking about sort of reports that landed at specific stages? And some of that's just around what we were hearing this morning too, around delays around workforce acquisition and contract, all these sort of things. Should we be, in your view, is it helpful to be on sort of a regimented 6 months? Should we be looking at maybe stage approaches? What would be helpful?
We've maintained either quarterly or 6-monthly through all the stages so far, and that seems to be working well. If Council would like that to change, then that would be a decision of Council.
Yeah, and also as chair of the committee, there was a month that we had a meeting cancelled through lack of business, and then one's also been affected with a COVID lockdown, and so therefore this is the next meeting for those reports that would have typically come in back in June. And I can understand from what Bryce has outlined that the next one will be a 6-month and put us back on track next month.
Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Bryce, you mentioned in your verbal update that there'll be a paper coming around stage 3. Will that include the design of stage 3, or will it just be around the contract itself?
So the designs we're actually submitting for consent Friday this week. So this will just be to award the construction contract. So all of the design is sort of well underway and outside of that contract.
Okay. So would you be able to include the design in the paper so that we can be informed of what's been consented?
Yes, can give a bit of a budget overview. The paper will be presented in part 2, given it's a contract award as per standard practice, so I can put a bit of information at a more high-level budget standpoint if you'd like.
Okay. Given that this is a project that's been ongoing over a number of years, are we seeing costs increasing, from what we've budgeted? Because insofar as, the budget that was put aside for stage 3, we've got 1.7 this financial year, approximately, and 2 million the next financial year. Are we feeling that is still in the right ballpark?
We definitely have seen cost increases. What it cost us to do a unit in stage 1, essentially, it does cost us more now, naturally. We managed to relatively hold those prices for stage 2, which was quite advantageous. But yes, we did amend the budgets through the long-term planning process, and that did see a bit of an increase to deliver stage 3. Unsure of whether that amount, I've had nothing flagged to me so far to suggest anything else, but that will become apparent in that report that'll come to you in December, whether there needs to be any amendment to that.
Okay. And then just a final question, if I may, Mr. Chair, which may or may not be able to answer just now. We've got money for additional social housing in the budget from financial year 23 to 24. At what stage will there be some papers or some planning about that to Council? Like, what's the lead-in time, given your experience with this project?
Well, definitely leading into it, the first decision that council will need to make is where and what, I suppose, exactly they're looking to do. So we will need to identify a site, and there are a number of potential ones floating around of what we have discussed, the likes of Summerhays and things like that in the past. Although that doesn't necessarily need to be social housing, but that could be an option. Alternatively, council could look to follow a similar model to what they did with Papeoria, whereby we can demolish and replace an existing block, for instance, as opposed to picking a greenfield site. Those decisions will need to be made, and they will need to be made in advance. At this stage, I don't have a definitive date when I'll be able to come to you with that, but it definitely is in the planning and thinking at the moment, and it will probably come to you, I would suggest, in multiple options over the next couple of years, as opposed to one big $14 million development, possibly.
Okay. So I guess my question is around whether or not we as council need to be requesting and reporting on that, or can we expect that that's going to be coming maybe to this committee or to another committee?
The decisions around where and the scope of that will definitely come to council for input and decision. In terms of a definitive date, I guess that may be a little bit difficult to plan at this stage exactly when I'd be in a position to do that of any meaningful quality, but definitely that will need to come to council and is intended that it will at some point.
Thank you. That's Chair.
Thank you. There's no further questions, Bryce. Thank you for presenting this report. I'll move the recommendations, both of them, that the report titled Papeoria Place Redevelopment 6-Monthly Update presented to the Infrastructure Committee on the 27th of October 21 be received for information, and 2, that councillors note the external funding was secured to contribute towards stage 2 of the work. I'll move it. Looking for a seconder. Councillor Harpeta. Open it up for any comment or debate. Councillor Johnson, followed by Councillor Naylor.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to comment how well this project has been managed and how well the outcomes have been achieved, both the financial and the social outcomes, and also the aesthetic outcomes, if you know what I mean. I did take a little wander down last week, and the final units are looking really good. And I think that the way that this project has been managed, in particular, has been a model of how we'd like projects to be managed in the future, I suppose. It's been on time, it's been on budget, and it's a really good outcome. And so I think that needs to be acknowledged, at least now. At least we never know when we might get a chance to acknowledge things. But credit where credit is due. It's been a really well managed project, and one that we can be proud of.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Thank you. Just obviously agree with the comments that have been made. It's a great outcome to see the next stage of social housing completed. I guess in terms of the reporting, I guess I am a little bit dissatisfied with the way this has evolved. It was obviously requested through the Finance and Audit Committee, and I guess there's the assumption there that a 6-monthly report on a program such as this would have financial information included. And it's obviously really reassuring to say to hear that we have that this has been completed within budget. But I just also am very aware that the budget for this stage per unit was significantly higher than the first unit, and there's obviously some really good reasons for that. But I think that is something that is valuable for us as elected members to be able to observe and monitor in terms of how it informs our decisions going forward. If moving reports from one committee to another means that financial information drops off, then I think that's unfortunate. It feels a little bit more patchy in terms of the way that's reported. If it means that we need to request that through a different committee to get that financial information, then perhaps we can do that. But I do think it's relevant for us when we're looking at a program and a project that's been delivered to be able to observe the effectiveness or the efficiency of how the financial aspect of that as well as the final result.
Thank you. No further speakers. I'll now invite a vote. Thank you. It is passed, 13 votes for and none against. Our next item is item 8, which is the Infrastructure Unit Capital Works Dashboard, June 21, and it's presented by our Manager of Project Management Office, Jeffrey Snedden. Welcome.
Thank you. I take the report as being read. There are a couple of things I'd like to bring to your Council's attention, if I may. In summary, the capital program last year, we continue to deliver around the mid-70s % of the capital program. We saw a pleasing increase in our delivery of our capital new program last year, so that was pleasing. We sit around 75 to 79% delivery over a 4-year period, and that's taking into account the impacts of COVID on the program itself and the constraints that we've heard about this morning and also from NZDF. So that was pleasing. We saw some pretty significant projects completed last year. The entrance into the arena and Bryce and Papiaoia Stage 2 and the opening by the Prime Minister. So we have seen impacts of COVID on our construction, and we see it across the industry as a whole. We've seen increase in investment in infrastructure by central government, and this is part of the Three Waters investment, especially into our programs. We've seen supply chain disruptions, reduction in contractor and consultant availability, and also pressure on internal staff resourcing, which again you heard all about this morning. So things we're doing to try and address that, we're looking at how we engage with the industry in the construction space, better forward planning, working with the Infrastructure Commission to do better forward planning, making people more aware on a national level of what we have coming up. Bundling of work. Bundling has been talked about for a while, but looking at not only similar projects, but also looking at similar programs where there are elements within those programs that are that can be bundled together, such as the mechanical and electrical contracts that we're looking at putting out. And also, finally, early engagement of contractor, so that we can get contractors in earlier to advise us on buildability and, as mentioned this morning, look at purchasing of products and materials from overseas early. Finally, I just want to raise with the Council, our capital program includes an element of funding for growth. And so in this current financial year, we have approximately $17 million of growth programs sitting in the capital program. Now, 2/3 of that growth, outside of Whakarongaranga, are outside of our control. So we rely on developers to undertake works in which we then contribute to. So we refer to these as programs at risk. So we're talking about 14% of our overall capital program is outside, that sits in this programs of risk category. So this morning when we were talking about our ability to deliver the capital program, we are not going to, because there are $14 million worth, there is about 14% of our program which we won't have control over, and we're reliant on others to deliver. And they are also being impacted by COVID, supply chain issues, and contractor shortages. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions. I'll
Thank you. I'll open it up for members if there are any questions. Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Jeff. Just referring to on page 20 there's under projects to look out for this year, significant infrastructure investment into the North East Industrial Zone. Can you describe whether is that roading?
Through Mr. Chairman. It's roading, it's Three Waters. So we've got a lot of growth programs that are being funded in that area, and also some of our infrastructure works itself. So yes, it's the broad roading and Three Waters.
Yeah, thank you. So just in terms of the roading, you're aware of the emerging issue around boy races or street races. Is there any planning to try and put some preventative measures in there in terms of the engineering going forward into that program? Or are we just going to build roads? That becomes skid pans. That's the question.
Can I, through the chair, can I respond to that one?
Certainly. Sarah Sinclair, Infrastructure GM.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Hancock. The notice of motion that was passed last week has asked us to go away and look at all of the aspects of antisocial behaviour and boy racing, which will include looking at infrastructure. We are aware that the design of industrial estates is part of the problem. So obviously that will be included in our considerations. If you're asking if there's a programme of work to look at that in our current budgets, no, there isn't, which is why the notice of motion was helpful.
Yes, thank you. That's a really, really helpful comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Thanks for the report. Just also the explanation you gave about the capital works that are at risk. I'm just trying to understand the graph on page 20. So you talked about 14%. So there's 21% growth, and then there's a 6% risk part. Can you just explain what the 14% is?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the 14% is the growth reduced out of what we aren't managing at the moment. So Whakarongaronga is quite a large investment, it's around $4 and a bit million into infrastructure, which is still within those growth. They're called, it's a growth program, but it's actually one of the only programs that we have control over.
Sorry, perhaps I'm not making myself clear. So we've got that, I'm looking at that circle, yes, and it's got the renewal, 21% of growth, and then 6% of risk, at risk. And you talked about a 14%. So are you talking about just part of the growth? 14%,
yes, is part of that 21% growth. So the remaining 7%, I think, relates to Whakarongaronga, which we're doing.
And so what's the 6% risk part?
6% is what we've indicated as projects that we are working on, that we have control over, that we're finding being impacted by our ability to deliver, such as incredibly long lead times now that we're getting out of projects.
And do we have a list of the 6%, what programs make up that 6% somewhere?
I'm sure we do. Yes, sir. That would be able to supply that.
And so if they're at risk, at what point does it get determined that won't go ahead in this financial year?
I think as per the discussion this morning, we are looking at prioritisation of the program, and our ability to deliver the project would be a consideration in that prioritisation. And I think that was raised this morning, And again, I'm not able to advise when that would happen, but it's something that we're constantly doing.
Yeah, okay. And just the information we got through in our finance reports this morning show a $102 million capital program for this year, because I think there was $4 million that was carried forward that were added to that. So will that be incorporated in this dashboard going forward for the 21-22 year?
This dashboard relates solely to infrastructure.
Yeah.
So infrastructure's program is $98 million. It's not the capital program for the organisation. We do invest in libraries and IT, etc., which do not fall within the infrastructure, I guess, program of work. So that's why there is that difference.
Okay. And if elected members would like to understand the list of programs in that at-risk area, would we need to do a councillor help request, or what's the best way for us to find that information
I'm
out?
sure we can get that circulated in the next few days offline. That would be true? Yeah.
Thank you.
Would that be okay? I don't want to overcommit. Maybe some comments.
I would. Councillor Vaughan. Sarah Sinclair here, CIO. Whilst we can provide you a list of things that we've currently flagged as being at risk, what I was hoping was that we would be able to bring you a more developed paper on what we consider the impact to be, as we've run through what we can bundle and what we think that how we're sort of anticipating the likely impacts. So whilst we can give you that immediate list now, that won't be the end of the conversation. This is an evolving piece of work that we are working on, which we are happy to come back and report on later.
Thank you, Sarah. I don't think we need to overcomplicate it. I know there's some ongoing work, but just the simple list of what the state of play is now, I think, is what members would be satisfied with for now. And that can come offline in the course of the next week. Thank you. There's no further questions, Jeffrey, so thank you for presenting this report. I'm happy to move it, that the report titled Infrastructure Unit Capital Works Dashboard June 21 presented to the Infrastructure Committee meeting of the 27th of October 21 be received for information. Look for a seconder, Councillor Beattie. Open it up for any comments or debate. There being none, I'd like to invite a vote. Thank you. That has passed. 14 votes for and none against. Item 7 is the 6-monthly Transport Network Safety Update Report, 19-year 20, number 3. Coming forward is Chris Lai, who will present, and Robert Van Bentum. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair and Councillors. Chris has a presentation which he'll bring up, and he'll talk to that. So.
Good afternoon, Council. I'll take it the report is read first as well. So, how do I get the presentation?
We just wait for the presentation to come up. The floor is yours.
Yep. So the purpose of this presentation is for us to, I guess, let you know of the projects that we're looking to plan and deliver over the next LTP, the next 3 years. So these are the projects that we have applied to NZTA under their low-cost, low-risk program, in which subsidised funding has been approved. So I'll just briefly go over the main programs that we have. So we've got 279, which has been a minor roads improvements program, which we've had for the last several years. The focus on this program is really around local road issues, using our road safety program tool to address things like traffic calming, speeding, active mode safety improvements. Then we've got program 2119, which is our Road to Zero program. These projects have been determined with NZTA, identifying, I guess, the high risk areas in which there can be some standard safety interventions to improve safety, which is considered to be good value. And then we've got a whole bunch of one-off programs that we're looking to deliver, which generally have a road safety element to them. So if you go to the next program. So under the 279 program, we've got 5 projects to deliver this financial year, which we're looking to build. So we've got a raised pedestrian crossing on Wilson Line, which is upgrading of the existing zebra crossing near Wilson School. Ophir Road, sorry. The second one is some improvements around Takaro School, so traffic calming Brighton Crescent with some raised platforms, as well as a new zebra crossing outside the school gate, as well as a raised pedestrian crossing on Highbury Avenue between Rongberg and Redmond Place. So this is just, which connects also to Monroe Park. The next one we have is Havelock Avenue, which is doing some raised platforms and some refuge islands at the ends of the street. And on Herbert Avenue and Churchill Avenue, we're looking to do some further raised platforms to traffic calm the road as well. And under the Road to Zero, we're looking to work with KeyRail on the level crossing closure on Railway Roberts. We're looking at turn restrictions at the intersections of Whitsunday, Fitzherbert Palm, and Fitzherbert Marn Street. On Ruahine Street, we're looking to provide a raised zebra crossing outside Terraston School to help with the children's crossing, which has been identified as a safety issue with the police. And on Vogel Street, we're looking at doing a upgrading the zebra crossing near the shops close to Tremaine Avenue. So in terms of other related programs, we've got the intersection of Rongotia Road No. 1 line. We're proposing to do some what they call rural intersection activated warning signs. So these are signs where it reduces the speed limit on approach to it on the main road if there is cars coming in from the side road. Being a T intersection, this is considered a high crash risk. On Highbury Avenue, outside the Highbury shops, we're looking at doing some raised pedestrian crossings as part of the streetscape improvements. And then on East Street, we're looking at some temporary traffic improvements as agreed to by council just recently. Aside from those projects, we're also working on some other projects in the background in terms of just design and consultation for future delivery. So we're looking at some raised platforms on Broadway Avenue and Seddon Street. We're doing some technical work on the speed limits, some more speed limits around the city, and hoping to go out to consultation on that early 2022. We're looking to improve the Cook Street roundabouts, making them slower with raised platforms. There's some design work on Streets for People as part of the low cost low risk. And in terms of Ferguson Street, just looking to be 2 lanes in each direction, but also to have traffic signals at the intersection of Pitt Street. I do note with this project that we're potentially looking at building this one this financial year, so this one's a little bit of a mistake on the presentation. And then going on to the future years, 2 and 3, we've got quite a number of other projects that we'll be working on. So signalised intersection at Tennant and Main, raised platforms or raised intersections for Ruahine Featherston, raised roundabout for Victoria Ferguson, traffic calming on Hiratonga Street, raised intersection at Hiratonga Featherston Street, raised signalised intersection at Pitt and Burke, raised intersection at Featherston Albert, potentially more speed limits to be reviewed in the future, at permanent treatment for East Street, further traffic calming on Centennial Drive, most likely to be raised platforms, and some intersection works at Franklin Newcastle, Newcastle Ascot, and Franklin Churchill, which is generally around tightening the corners, improving the pedestrian connectivity, and just reducing speeds at those intersections. So yeah, those are the projects that we're looking to deliver the next 3 years, and if there's, depending on how they progress, there might be future opportunities for other projects to be delivered as well. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Chris. The first one I'd like to just raise myself is the Roberts Line Railway Road, the level crossing closure. That's where we had the fatality of the doctors, that's correct?
That's correct.
So that has been decided now, and that will be actioned this financial year to close off Roberts Line to that.
With
the outcome?
So with the NZTA funding, I guess we've got a 3-year period to do it. Our intention is to do it this financial year, but a lot of it depends on talking with KeyRail and getting them to approve the design and I guess work with us on that. So yes, we're trying to move that along as much as we can.
Okay, so perhaps a follow-up question. So when they were in the actual year being described, it's actually still to be interpreted that it's over the 3-year period, not that year specifically then, is it?
Our intention is to do it, to close it off this financial year.
Okay.
But we do have that window of opportunity.
I'm happy with that. Thank you. Councillor Johnson, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Chris. I've got some questions about pedestrian safety, and refer first of all on page 24 to the heat map that you've given us in figure 5. And I note that there's, and you've commented that there's an increase in pedestrian crashes in Highbury Avenue. So, in the 10-year plan deliberations, council has brought forward the neighbourhood streetscape improvements for Highbury Avenue in recognition that this was a dangerous stretch of road, and you've referred to that in your presentation. Can you give us any update as to when that will occur, other than it's just this financial year? Because both from the previous council decision and from the information you've given us today, it would seem to be a high priority.
Yeah, so it's something that I'm working on at the moment. I guess I'm meeting with the Oroconnect community group tomorrow, and depending on what they say, we're going to go straight out to consultation of the immediate affected area, and hopefully deliver early 22. So we've had discussions with Fulton Hogan on potential delivery, and that's when they've penciled in. So yeah, just after the financial year, around that time. So it is a work question.
Good. And related to that is the crossing in Brighton Crescent outside Tarkrow School. So I understand that they've been without a clear crossing there for quite some time. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So has there been consultation with the school about this programme that is proposed now?
I've been discussing. I was approached directly by Tarkrow School probably over a year ago, and I've been discussing with these proposals with them since that time. A lot of it was dependent on the low-cost, low-risk program being approved by NZTA, and because I've approved it, we're now able to go ahead.
Okay. So when we're making road safety decisions, you've commented further down that the schools are a higher priority. Do we look at whether or not accidents involve children, or do we put all pedestrians in together, if you know what I mean by that?
We haven't specifically looked at children. We've just been looking at all crashes in general, and the nature of them. So, yeah, pedestrians, cyclists, or
okay. Vehicles. And in terms of Highbury Avenue, I mean, there are two schools that feed onto Highbury Avenue. There's Takaro School, and then there's Te Kura Waro, the old Somerset School. I don't recall that we've got any school speed zone on Highbury Avenue, do we?
Takaro School has one on Highbury Avenue and around their school, but other than that, there's not much else. So through our speed limit stage 2, we're looking at trying to expand our school areas. So we've actually started engagement with schools. We sent out a wide email to all schools to ask them what school area they want.
Right.
And Te Kura Waro have spoken to us. We know what they want, and that's something we're trying to work through.
So would they like a school speed zone on Highbury Avenue around the end of Highbury Avenue? Yeah, okay, good. So in terms of the money that we've got in the budget for the neighbourhood streetscape improvements, I understand we've got a budget of $309,000 in Programme 1803. If we don't get the full funding through Waka Kotahi, do you automatically come to council to say, are you prepared to fund extra? Or is it an operational decision to decide whether or not to go ahead?
If it's not funded by, subsidised by Waka Kotahi, would probably come to council to ask for further funding, or whether we should defer the project till later. But my understanding for that program is it was subsidised.
Okay, all right, that's good. Thank you. So, in terms of the whole city picture, you listed a lot of safety improvements that occur over the next few years. I noted that majority of them were in the southern eastern part of town. Do we put any kind of equity lens over where we do the improvements to make sure that we are being fair to all suburbs in the town?
We don't do an equity lens. I guess we've just been prioritising them based on road safety risk in a way, or?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, just a comment. I mean, the decisions around safety and traffic calming are really based on evidence, so they're based on balancing a whole range of criteria. So, yes, we look at the whole transport system in order to make sure that if we put in individual treatments in particular areas, we don't create unintended consequences. But it is very much based on where the accident history, where the vulnerable road users are based. So no, we're certainly not we're not about allocating money across geographical areas of the city.
Right. So that's interesting then, because when I look at the heat map of pedestrian crashes, there are hardly any in that quarter of the town. But that seems to be where particularly the outer years safety improvements are going to be. So that seems a bit strange.
Well, remember, that's only one of the accident measures. We also have vehicle crashes and cyclists as well. So, and it's also, we're looking at corridors, and we're looking at reinforcing slow speed corridors as part of Road to Zero. So there are a number of moving pieces around, identifying particular treatments. I mean, the reality is that the whole city, we get a lot of pressure to slow speeds everywhere across the city for all sorts of reasons. So, it is actually a sort of strategic prioritisation exercise to decide where we intervene. So,
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harpiter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chris and Robert. Mine was really to do with your presentation. Just wanting to know if we could get a timeline of when all those activities will be delivered in the next financial year.
I mean, I think we have some indicative timelines for some of the projects, but in all cases there's a degree of engagement. So that engagement is a little uncertain in terms of how long that takes. We're also working with our contractor. In most cases, all of these relatively small capital investments are with our Fulton Hogan contractor for delivery, so we're relying on them to tell us when they can program these. I mean, the reality is that most of this work will be built in the second half of the year. So, but we couldn't tell you which treatment might go ahead in February, March or April. But certainly, if we do get some confirmed programs, we'll be looking to share those, put those up on the website. A little like we're planning to, I think, the CIO mentioned this morning that we'd put up the reseal program. So when we're clear about what that's looking like, which streets will be done within which month, so people have a little bit of a headline. So we would certainly, if we had that information, we'd share that.
Even if it was a guide to give us an indication of when we were going to be doing some of these projects, because some of them have been talked about for a while, so it'd be good to get a guide of when we were going to be doing some of them.
Yeah, we could probably create a list timetable to give to Council.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Hancock, followed by Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks Chris and Robert. Just going to paragraph 2.4, just trying to seek some clarification on this, and that's Waka Kotahi have reported that the non-injury crashes reported for 2021 have not been uploaded into the crash analysis system. So I guess what concerns me is whether or not that has any impact on the analysis or prioritisation.
I guess the prioritisation we were using was from the years 2016 to 2020. So it wouldn't have used the data from the first half of 2021. So probably wouldn't have affected. So that didn't change what we were looking at when we submitted the low-cost, low-risk program. The non-injury crashes are probably not the measure that we're looking at. It's generally the serious and fatal crashes, which I guess which has a higher weighting in terms of where projects are delivered.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I accept that really, but the number of crashes, like a crash is a crash, and whether injury actually results from that, of course, is I suppose sometimes down to luck, I guess. So to expand on this, I suppose what I want to know, and I want some reassurance around this, is whether or not this lack of data entry by Waka Kotahi is happening year on year, and if so, how does that impact our prioritisation?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Maybe just comment. I mean, yes, of course, any lag in data will have an effect on a rolling average, but in effect, the program is based on a trend. So, yes, isolated one-off serious accidents or crashes will contribute. I mean, the spikes go up and down. I mean, actually, in terms of the funding support we get from Waka Kotahi, it is very focused on what we call the deaths and serious injuries. That drives their Road to Zero program. So that's how we have been working collaboratively with them about determining which parts of the city get treatments or get funded treatments from, with subsidy from Waka Kotahi. So, I mean, of course, we could advance additional treatments in other areas if we felt they were important, but we would have to fund those entirely ourselves. So, that evidence-based approach runs through. Short-term lags in terms of that data, it's unfortunate. I mean, clearly there's a bit of a capacity issue or there's a delay, but I mean, the trends will still emerge over time, over a number of years. So, yeah.
Yep, thank you. Can I just move on to just briefly on to section 4 of the report, which talks about the antisocial behaviour and the street races. It kind of sort of ends abruptly, and it doesn't really sort of talk about solutions. So I just wonder if perhaps you could just give us some narrative around that, please.
Could I speak to that one, please, through the chair?
Certainly.
Sarah Sinclair, CIO here. We added that section as it's a new section this time round, the antisocial behaviour. We added it simply because there has been, in terms of the road safety, it has been coming up as an escalating issue, and we wanted to make sure that elected members knew that we were looking at it. Since this was, while this was being drafted, there was also the work on the notice of motion. So this was simply intended to indicate that we are fully aligned with the notice of motion to try and resolve this problem, and we will be going away to look at a range of things, not just bylaws, but also the infrastructure elements. So yes, I acknowledge that it hasn't got answered. It was simply intended to signal that we are sort of wrapping the infrastructure thinking into that notice of motion.
Thank you for your assurance there, Sarah. I was just hoping that we all are ensured that we're in the headlights. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Yeah, thank you. So I might just switch to this one. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Chris and Robert. Three areas of questions. The first one was just in relation to the presentation, the Cook Street roundabout upgrades. Currently, the Cook Street roundabouts are quite, in some ways, unique in the way that they manage the integration of vehicular and cycle traffic compared to what we see elsewhere in the city, I suppose. Will this be an opportunity to get a more consistent approach through the Cook Street roundabouts, and what might that look like?
I guess there's some good opportunities with the Cook Street roundabouts. Yes, we will try to make them a bit more consistent, but because we're adding, raised platforms onto them, they'll be slightly different as well in terms of getting reduced speeds. We're also looking to try and make it better in terms of for active transport, so cycling, to navigate through them, because I guess roundabouts aren't the greatest intersection treatment for them. We'll try and make them more consistent, but also make some improvements.
Yeah, probably, Mr. Chair. I think the first thing to recognise is that the existing designs of roundabouts are actually very poor for cyclists and pedestrians. So the problem is traffic does not slow down. So pedestrians find it extremely hard to cross, and the cyclists are forced to merge into the active traffic lane. So there are a number of strategies which we'll look at. One of those is simply putting in a series of raised platforms at the pedestrian crossing point, which slows vehicles and then allows maybe cyclists to merge. There are some other solutions which we're going to look at through the design process. One is something called a Dutch roundabout, which is actually a level circular platform on which cyclists can move around the roundabout. So that's something else we may be looking at. We may propose to bring that for consideration. So there are also some options on Cook Street to reverse the position of the cycle lane and the parked lane, so bring the cyclists in against the curb and move the parked cars out into next to the active road. So, yeah, I think consistent. I don't think we have a solution at the moment in the city, except possibly in the slow speed areas where cyclists can navigate in the active traffic lane, say within the inner city where they share the traffic lane under slow speed environments. But otherwise, I think roundabouts are really very poor in terms of their current safety outcomes for pedestrians and cyclists. So I think we have to we're looking to address that. So this is probably the first place we'll look at what some of those solutions might be. Yeah.
Thank you. I guess just to follow up then, so as I'd understood from the slides, it was sort of a focus around roundabouts. You've mentioned some things about the streets in between the roundabouts as well. So are we looking at a whole solution around Cook Street, or are we just hitting the roundabouts at this point?
The roundabouts are the most costly part of the re-engineering, so some of the other intervening sections could well be done as part of other programs like the Urban Cycle Master Plan. So, at the moment, they are relatively low cost. But And also we look to combine some of these treatments with our reseal program. So when we're coming through and doing some reseals, we can take the opportunity to change line markings and some priorities as well. So, yeah.
Thank you. The second question was just around, and I suppose prompted further by the presentation, but there's sort of speed bumps popping up everywhere, which is, I guess, one way to respond to the sort of issues we see, and I guess it's sort of an infrastructure lens on it, but sort of how far do we go down the turning the city into a city of speed bumps path before we start to really bring the other levers like more police intervention, traffic cameras, et cetera, in to really modify some of the behavior within the existing infrastructure?
Really, I mean, I don't know if you're been watching the general media, but at the moment, active police enforcement of traffic is pretty much, absent from the city. I mean, their current investment is largely confined to the state highway network. They have very limited resource. I think they're transitioning to Waka Kotahi to take responsibility for that over a number of years. So, I mean, yes, we would certainly, like to engage with, the police in terms of lifting that option, but I think the reality is we can change speeds, but unless you reinforce those speeds with physical infrastructure changes, you can get relatively low compliance in some areas. There are other mechanisms, and obviously in the neighbourhood streets, there's more parked cars and there's more general conflict, so people tend to drive more slowly. But on our major corridors, it's certainly difficult to get compliance with slower speeds without engineered interventions. So, yeah.
I'll just add to that. So I guess there is a lot of raised platforms in what I've presented, but the raised platforms are the standard safety intervention by NZTA now. That's the recommended treatment to reducing speeds, and because reducing speeds is the main factor to reducing the severity of crashes. So that's and if we didn't propose that, we're least likely to get the subsidised funding for the safety improvements that we've in the network.
Cool, thank you. Finally, Mr. Chair, just I suppose something that I think we see in the city and that probably comes through in some of the injury stats if we drill down here, so the impact of increasing heavy vehicle movements in the city, and just wondered what we're doing to sort of understand what's happening in terms of heavy vehicle traffic in the city, and then what management responses we might see around that.
I mean, the council has agreed to programs of work around the PNITI, or the Rural Freight Ring Road, and they're very much predicated on committing to moving heavy vehicles, off some of the routes and onto the outer freight ring road. In the interim, obviously, when that doesn't exist, we still are quite keen to take them off some of the routes that have more vulnerable users. So at the moment, a lot of the work that we're doing at the moment is focused around safety, but there is a separate program of work under supporting PNITI, activating the urban mode shift, and that will, I suppose, use treatments which seek to make it a bit more painful for trucks to go down certain roads. Again, it will be about probably slowing, but also changing geometry, making it difficult to get round roundabouts or past, So essentially, persuading trucks to stay on dual carriageways and roads that are better designed for them and are not in conflict with cyclists and other active transport users. So, I mean, that strategy is articulated in what we call a network operating plan, which highlights various priority routes. It's fair to say that at the moment that we have a number of master plans which need to be better integrated, and there are still some conflicts. We have some routes that show cyclists, and they're clearly heavy vehicle routes. So we need to make some hard decisions about
putting those active transport users on parallel routes or on different alignments. So, in progress, nothing at this stage we could point to in this program in the next couple of years which specifically targets heavy vehicles, but there will be some routes that currently they use. We'll be looking to discourage them from using, and there may need to be some intersection improvements to make it easier for them to move, use the preferred routes. Yeah. So.
Thanks. Just to follow that up, then, any thought about using the bylaw instruments that are available to us, and I guess the context around that is Christchurch being a grid-based city has a bylaw that provides clear instruction around where heavy vehicles go and where heavy vehicles don't go. And I would expect that it delivers some safety benefits as well as probably infrastructure benefits as well. So what I heard in your response was everything but bylaws. I guess, is there an active consideration within the work program around where bylaws may or may not fit into the mix?
Yeah, I think we'd have to talk to maybe strategy and planning a little more detail about the practicality of some of those. I mean, we do actually have some signs as you come into the CBD which say no heavy vehicles. I haven't seen those stop some of the B trains trucking on down Cook Street. So, I mean, yes, bylaws are an instrument, but they then bring an obligation for enforcement and prosecution, and I mean, I couldn't comment on how successful they've been in other jurisdictions. They certainly at this stage haven't been something we've considered. I think, we're probably not, we're not saying we want to ban heavy trucks from certain routes. We want to make it less pleasant and less efficient for them so they naturally make the right choices on our roads. I mean, one of the key drivers is not just safety. I mean, the heavy vehicles are essentially, they're resulting in huge damage to many of our roads, much of which now we are really struggling to repair and maintain and renew. So, I mean, if we don't change the way the vehicles are moving, we will simply have an enormous asset, bow wave of renewals to be.
Yeah. Great. Thank you for those answers, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Just finally, I just wanted to clarify one of your points in your presentation, Chris, around the Ferguson Street section between Pitt and Linton. You mentioned in your presentation that while it was noted in the 22-23 year, you're bringing that forward to the current year. Has that been approved, and is it an intention to widen that stretch? Can I just understand what was interpreted?
I guess it's been a project for a while, and it's been deferred constantly. I think we've been discussing, I guess, internally when we deliver it. I think eventually it landed on this financial year.
If I can comment, I mean, we're in the final stages of detailed design for the project. However, we now have a period when we want to engage with directly affected parties, particularly in that vicinity. While they're aware of the project, I mean, there will be some concerns about access, both for the final design, but also to work through the construction methodology and how to minimise negative impacts. Even if we go to tender, in say decide Christmas or early next year, it's highly unlikely we'll get a contractor, up and running much before the end of this financial year. So, even though the work may begin, the majority we expect to occur in the next financial. But it has been funded and approved by Waka Kotahi, so and the funding is within the 3-year envelope, so we have scope to deliver, over the next few years. So.
Great. Thank you. There's no further questions. Thank you both Chris and Robert.
Thank you.
I'd like to move the recommendations of this report, that the report titled 6-Month Transport Network Safety Update Report 2019-2020, number 3, presented to the Infrastructure Committee of the 27th of October 21, be received for information. Seconded, Councillor Butt. open it up for comment. I want to lead off. The two bits, there's obviously a whole bunch of good that's going to be done from these treatments, and many of those in a local setting, those local residents will get a lot of benefit. But on the wider scale, I think there's some significant projects that got raised today that are getting advanced. One is the first off that brought a lot of attention when we had the fatalities at Railway Road, Roberts Line intersection, and having that mentioned today prompts back the feelings of even some of those that were submitting at the time around the safety concerns with that road getting busier, with heavier transport on it. It's used heavily both day and night, and that's even before you start to think of the Outer Ring Road and the rail hub projects that are planned for that space. And so I think that's very encouraging for those that were advocating for closure of that piece of junction. I think that's going to come very pleasing for them. The other part is a line of questioning just before around that Ring Road section on Ferguson Street between Pitt and Linton. I want to raise this because I was part of the school opening back in 2011 of Intermediate Normal, where they opened their side entranceway down Linton Street from the former entranceway on the busy Ferguson Street. That's where it previously existed. And I just was prompted to go back to the Manawatu Standard report on that. That was 14 years in the making to open that side entranceway, with the council's support to help purchase that section for that to be achieved. And so when I think back, that strategic piece of road is the only two-lane carriageway of our ring road, which is a strategic investment and strategic plan, can finally start to be completed. I think that's important, not only for that transport, getting vehicles around the square and the city effectively, but for all the safety benefits that will bring. So pleased to hear this final stage of design and getting built, and with consultation included. But I think that's be a real milestone to achieve. Following speakers, Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I mostly want to focus my comments on the safety improvements that are proposed for Highbury Avenue, and I think it would be completely remiss of me not to bring forward again the community concerns about safety, particularly of children on Highbury Avenue. You can see from the heat map that Highbury Avenue is a hotspot for pedestrian crashes. Last year, I think it was almost a year ago, we heard a deputation from Te Waka Huia at the Community Development Committee meeting about speed on Highbury Avenue. There have been repeated concerns expressed by members of the community. I've been out on the ground in Brighton Crescent with the chair of the Board of Trustees of Takaro School, looking at their road crossings. And I'm just going to read a little segment of an email that I received from the Highbury Whānau Centre, and this was in May, and this was following a school child being hit by a car on Highbury Avenue. As you are aware, this is an issue that the community has raised with the Palmerston North City Council many times, particularly in the last 2 years. The Highbury Whānau Centre, Takaro School and Te Waka Huia have hosted many community consultations where the consistent outcome has been to have pedestrian crossings reinstated, installing speed bumps and better traffic signage. Meetings have been held and assurances given. Does a child need to die for the community to be heard? And in the 10-year plan consultation, we agreed to prioritise the safety treatments for Highbury Avenue. And I was told at the time, I've just checked my notes, that consultation with the community would start in July. Now I'm hearing that it's tomorrow that we're going to have a consultation meeting with Aura Connect. I cannot emphasise enough that the risk of a child being hit and killed by a car on Highbury Avenue is extremely high. There are 2 primary schools that feed out onto that road. There's an intermediate school. And I really would like to see some rapid actual physical work on the ground on Highbury Avenue to get these safety concerns addressed. I know there are other areas of the city that have got issues, but we can see, even from the limited stats that we have, that Highbury Avenue should be a priority. And I don't want to be here in 6 months or a year's time still banging on about it. I want it to get done.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Hapadel.
Thanks, Mr Chair. Thank you to Robert and Chris for bringing the report to us, but also especially to Chris for bringing up the projects that are going to be delivered over the next financial year. I think it's really important for us to know what those projects are and that we can communicate that with our community groups. I think if we don't know what they are, then we can't talk about it with the people that we do liaise with in our communities. I think we do need that plan going forward, and we need to know what we can talk about with our community groups. So if we can have that plan so we can talk about with our communities, then we can be informed and our communities can be informed going forward. So that's all we ask. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bauer.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Yeah, firstly, the report is excellent. It gives us a lot of useful information, especially looking ahead in terms of what is planned, thinking about that alongside the road resealing stuff that's online, etc. I think we're doing much better in terms of actually getting information proactively to the community in a way that they can understand what road network improvements are coming to their neighbourhood or coming to the parts of the network that they're interested in. So really appreciate the report for what that's offered. I think the theme that comes through this report for me is really ensuring that we complement the infrastructure opportunities that we have with the other appropriate measures. So thinking about the issues that we have around heavy vehicles and the impacts they have on the roading network and the impacts they have in terms of road safety. Yes, addressing that where we can and should through infrastructure, but I think we might benefit from having a wider lens around other opportunities to ensure that we're doing the best job of managing heavy vehicle impacts. Another example with street racers, yes, we can do some things in that infrastructure space, but getting our partners more strongly involved in managing the response there as well. So I think this report's been fantastic in terms of highlighting the opportunities through an infrastructure lens, but want to make sure that we're using those complementary and other tools that are available to us to best effect when we have some of the challenges that we do in the transport network and specifically the safety side of it. So we wish the officers all the best in seeing these works through and thank them for the information in the report.
Thank you. No further speakers. I'll invite a vote. Thank you. That is passed. 11 votes for and none against. Thank you. That brings us on to our next item, which is the Asset Management Improvement Plan update. Welcome Jonathan Ferguson-Pye, who is the Manager, Asset Planning Division, and also Helen Churton. Welcome. I'm yet to meet you. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Good afternoon, councillors. Before I start talking to the memo, just introduce Helen. Helen is the Asset Planning Team Leader, and importantly for the purpose of this memo, Helen is the Project Manager of the Asset Management Improvement Plan. So with over 300 individual items and over 70 programs stretched over a number of years, I need Helen's assistance if we deep dive into any of the details. So yes, look, I don't want to transverse any of the ground that we covered in this morning's meeting. I'll just talk to a couple of points and then just hand over to Helen just to raise a couple of issues before taking questions from councillors. First of all, I guess with the improvement plan, it's a key instrument to us increasing our level of asset management practice across the organisation and also that sort of continuous cycle of improvement over time. It's a key instrument in how we achieve that over the next number of years. The memo itself really just gives you a high-level summary of some of our project planning around the improvement plan. It lists, at least in the first year, some of the key items that we're looking at moving forward with the work program. talks to how we've prioritised the work program, the approach to implementation, and then obviously just very quickly talks about that change management piece that I talked about this morning. We also have an appendice to the memo, which sort of just sets out our timing and priorities over the next 4 years of the plan. I guess just two last issues. First of all, some of the programs will actually generate additional improvement items. So that's why this will evolve over time. If you look at, I think it's program 13, which is our strategic review of asset management practice, we've never actually looked and reviewed whether actually, in terms of our managing our assets, what our statutory obligations are and making sure that they're watertight and covered off. So it may be that we might ID a couple of gaps that we just haven't recognised in the past. So that could generate additional items to the improvement plan over time. Lastly, before I hand over to Helen, this morning I think Councillor raised raised an issue around, when is an item complete? Have all these items and programs, when is it complete? And I guess I'd just reinforce Masuma's response to that question, which is it's complete when we actually have it operating as business as usual. So, we have a lot of these programs that we've got in the appendice, but quite often it might just be we have to develop a policy. The policy provides potentially an operational framework for people at, for example, the wastewater treatment plant, but really that item isn't fully finished until it's actually BAU and actually part of the way we manage the business. And then obviously we do have a part around closing the loop in terms of monitoring. So those items that you see on that appendice, some of them we have stretched over a number of years because they will take a while for us to actually implement as BAU. So I'll just hand over to Helen.
Cool, thank you. Just wanted to talk about a couple of things. First of all, there might be some confusion when you read the report as to actually how many programs there are. Are there 75 or are there 77? Because the numbers go up to 77, but we refer to there being 75 programs. That's purely a product. There are two consecutive numbers missing. When we first grouped the improvement items into programs, there were two others, and during the sort of sieving, I guess we amalgamated some programs. So even though the numbers go up to 77, there are actually only 75 programs. Another thing I'd like to do is give you an update on the table on page 34. So over the last month or so, I've actually had a bit of a push to get a few things going. So we've actually now got 40 of the 50 of this year's programs actually underway as we speak. So just a little bit of an update there. And the third thing is that this morning somebody asked regarding some of the maintenance and renewal type programs or tasks. Gosh, your due date for those is quite a long way away. Why would that be? Well, surely you'd want to get them done sooner. I think the answer to that is the order in which we want to do things. So in terms of maintenance and renewal programs and scheduling and looking at budget trade-offs, what we are planning to do first is look at renewal strategies. So we're going to do that in the 2020 calendar year, which obviously is not that far away. And then following that, we're going to look at budget renewals, trade-offs, and develop a much longer-term renewals type strategies. So those ones we think it'll actually take us a couple of years to get those going. So that's why, or get them finished, should I say. And that's why the date in Masuma's report seemed so far away, is that we've got a few things to do first, and then once we get onto them, we think it's going to take us quite a while to actually get those over the line. So that would be the answer to that question from this morning.
Ready for questions? Thank you. Councillor Hapeta.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Helen and Jono. I just was interested in program number 18, the councillor level of service review. What's that?
So that is an item that came out of the asset management maturity assessment, and it was a recommendation that just said we need to at some stage have a discussion around levels of service with councillors. So that feeds into the 10-year plan process. So we're currently just working with strategy and planning around how that's going to be moved forward in terms of some options to go to ELT and then what might get brought forward to councillors maybe in the new year. So that's sort of an item that we've got in there, but we sort of work closely with strategy and planning on that.
So is that councillors feeding into that review? I just was a little bit confused.
Yeah, I think depending on the different options that we look at there, definitely there'd be councillors feeding into that review. We probably haven't had a full level review of levels of service for a while now.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, members? There being none, thank you both. Thank you, Jono. Thank you, Helen. Appreciate the report. I'm happy to move it. And just to read what we're voting on, that the report titled Asset Management Improvement Plan Update presented to the Infrastructure Committee on the 27th of October be received for information. 2, that the committee note an update of the Asset Management Maturity Assessment has been scheduled by the Asset Planning Division for July 2022. 3, that the committee note that the formal progression of the Asset Management Improvement Plan, which supersedes the priorities and program recommendations for the 2019 Asset Management Maturity Assessment, started in May 21. I'm happy to move. I'll take Councillor Naylor as seconder. There's members lining up for that. Open it up for any comments or debate. Councillor Barrett.
Yeah, thanks. Just briefly, firstly, appreciate the proactive answer to the questions that I had this morning. Very helpful. But just really good to see this, actually. I think this is exactly the journey we need to be on as an organisation in terms of asset management and continuing to strengthen our processes and information around this. So to me, this is basically a report that was wall-to-wall good news, so really pleased with it.
Yeah, and just with some summary comments myself, I would say too, this is a huge step forward. Thank you for the work that you've done today and actually setting some line of sight of what needs to happen. The CE's not here, but I just really wanted to credit her for actually setting up the Asset Planning Division and giving it a dedicated resource and a dedicated focus. In past years, we haven't had to do too much of a deep dive to work out. There was pretty sketchy information on the state of our assets, and when we think of the hundreds of millions of dollars worth of assets that the city does have, it's really now gives a step of confidence knowing that we've got that resource and that information coming through. We actually know where we are and being quite real about it. Thank you. So now I invite a vote. As passed, 13 votes for, none against. Our final item today is item 11, which is our work schedule. Anything to add? Cheryl.
Thank you. Through the Chair, nothing further to add. All the sort of suggested or recommended changes are already highlighted in the schedule.
Thank you. Open it up for any questions. Councillor Naylor, or comment?
Yes, thank you. Just the infrastructure capital works dashboard that we had today, it says on the second point down, well, it says bi-monthly, but it hasn't been included in going forward. I'm just wondering when we would expect, is that to come every 2 months, or when would we expect that to come?
That's a good observation. Can I, Cheryl, or Sarah, are you online? Did you want to, either or? Cheryl, did you want to make a comment for now?
Not with any surety. I'm assuming that if it's down here for bi-monthly, it will continue being bi-monthly, but we can actually check up on that for you and let you know, along with those other questions you raised today.
Can I just perhaps follow up? Just in light of the comment that was made in the finance meeting this morning about officers reviewing the framework in which we provided the information in our finance committee, like we've got those 9 colour codes of being on budget, behind schedule, all of that. If that is being reviewed, would there be any consideration of the capital works dashboard information? At the moment, it seems that we get 2 different reports, and there's not necessarily any alignment that's obvious to me between those reports. Would there be any consideration of that information perhaps being provided with some better alignment with this report?
I can certainly take that back to the Chief Infrastructure Officer when she undertakes that review of the capital dashboard that she's looking at for the Finance and Audit Committee. I know that she's wanting to actually provide more meaningful and easier to follow information. So I can certainly talk to her without sort of ending up with two reports that look the same at both meetings.
Yeah, and in fairness, I know that the infrastructure unit's had some vacancies in their team, and their team is doing a fantastic work to get programs up and running. And some of the reporting is, I guess, has been stretched, and hence there's been a delay to get this report to us. And I guess that does lead to the value of it over, other work that officers are committed to. If there is a feeling that we still want a regular report, or if the report that's been referred to, rather than having a double up, we have one that has maybe more complete. Maybe that's an ongoing conversation for us to have.
Perhaps, Mr. Chair, if I could just make a brief comment.
Please.
I do think that there is some value in perhaps re-looking at this. I guess my reflection on some of the reports that go to finance and some of the reports that come here, there is a little bit of perhaps a disconnect, and I think there could be better alignment, whether it is that a report should just go to one or the other and have more complete information, or whether we get a bit of information here and a bit there. I'm not sure of the value of that. So I guess what my suggestion would be that if there is consideration of doing things differently, that what information comes to this committee is also considered alongside that, so that there is better alignment. I guess just as an example today, to come to this committee and find that 6% of the capital program is at risk when that perhaps wasn't identified in any way in the finance reporting, which is where I would expect to see that, raises the question to me, where should that reporting go, and how best is that going to be clear to elected members what that looks like? I don't want duplication of effort. I think if we can simplify that, that's good, but just needs to be clear where it goes and that it's in a format that's of value to elected members. Certainly those 9 colour codes, I've never found them confusing. I've always found them very helpful. But it certainly didn't give us the information of which programs out of all of those programs that were listed were actually at risk in any way.
Yep, I think you make some valid comments, and in response also, I think it comes down to some of the terms of reference, and perhaps with the Mayor and the Deputy and our chairs, we can maybe have a little discussion around those terms of references and see where there is crossover, and maybe we can have better alignment for future reporting as a suggestion. I think there's some work that we could do rather than just land it on officers that are guided by those terms of references. Thank you for making those points. Any other members wanting to speak? I'll move that we resolve the Infrastructure Committee receive the work schedule October 21, seconded by Councillor Hapeta. Invite a vote. Hapeta, sorry. Councillor. Otherwise I'll say, I'm into a song. I should say Councillor Leone. That's awesome. A call to invite. That is passed. 13 votes for, none against. That concludes our business for today's meeting. Thank you, members. Thank you, officers. Meeting closed.